let's get some stuff out of the way. So thank you very much. I'm looking forward to presenting this paper. The first paper was very interesting. That's how not to get exposed. And here we'll continue the coronavirus theme with some work that we did with a collaboration with RespiraWorks. So I'll go into the motivation for this work. We'll talk about the modeling, starting from the components that were developed, how they were developed, the system model architecture for the ventilator, some simulation results that showed the iterations of the design and what was learned from the simulations, and then some next steps. So motivation here is pretty clear. COVID-19 caused a pretty acute shortage of ventilators. So 3 engineers, Ethan, Edwin, and Elizabeth, wanted to help. They started an effort to develop a low-cost open source ventilator. Ventilators are very expensive components. They're very expensive medical devices, take years to develop, and are not always available. So as a result of their efforts, they quickly developed a couple of prototypes of a ventilator. Within a month, they founded RespiraWorks, which is a 501c3. That's a nonprofit organization. And their organization quickly grew to over 200 volunteers in over 10 countries. Their goal was really to democratize the ventilator, develop an open source and IP-free design that was a full-featured ventilator, not a temporary one that's based on people squeezing bags, but a real ventilator that could be used for sustained periods of time, since many COVID patients are on ventilators for a long time. In addition, they wanted an easy-to-build design that could be built in developing and low-resource countries, and were entirely committed to helping manufacturers build the ventilator. Lots of challenges for this organization. Ventilators typically are developed over 5 to 6 year development cycles by large medical device companies. They were pursuing multiple designs in parallel. They were also a global sort of crowd-funded organization with no physical base of operations, and that makes typical hardware-focused approaches not very feasible, since no one is really together in the same place. In addition to even build prototypes, the supply chains were extremely disrupted during the height of the COVID pandemic. So medical device parts that would go into the ventilator were actually not very much available. So they reached out to us at Modelon to see if we could help. They knew we had model libraries, a simulation platform, Modelon Impact. And so several of us from the Modelon side engage with this team in our off hours to develop models and help them out in simulations. And there was extensive use of simulation early in the design process, which I'll describe to you. So what is a ventilator? I'm sure everyone knows. It's a device that hooks to the patient who can perhaps not breathe at all or partially breathe. The device basically puts air into the patient and also can help with the exhale process by removing air from the patient. There's valves that control the airflow. It's computer controlled to set different amounts of breathing assist and different rates based on what the doctors prescribe. So that's a ventilator. I'm sure many people have seen them, and unfortunately, I think a lot more people have seen ventilators now than had ever seen them before. So what did we do from the component model side? The first part was to develop a model of the blower. So the goal of this team was to develop, as I said, a full-featured ventilator, not one that relied on compressed air, which is not often available, or bags or mechanical bellows. Unfortunately, during the time of the development of their ventilator, the blowers were in short supply and high cost. So the team focused actually on an automotive CPAP blower that was readily available. CPAP are breathing assist machines that are, but not medical devices. So they came up with this blower that's the X200N 12-volt DC blower. This blower is actually able to operate at about 1/5 of the cost and peak power of the medical blower, and we'll show what enables that. So from the supplier of the blower, we were able to get a couple of airflow curves. We used our Pneumatics Library. It had basically a fan model inside of it that could be characterized in this way. Volume flow as a function of dP over a range of speeds. And we used this characterization and matched it up to the limited data that was here to develop the model of the blower itself. The next key piece of the system was the Venturi flow sensor. medical flow sensors were completely unavailable. So the RespiraWorks team developed a custom Venturi sensor using about $20 of commonly available automotive parts to replace about $500 cost of unobtainable medical parts. They iterated on the design multiple times. We implemented this custom Venturi model in our library. It provides a pressure difference based on some characterization work performed by the team and can provide the delta pressure to the controller for flow estimation. So here's a picture of the Venturi and then a picture of it on the modeling side. The next key piece of the system was the valves. So ventilators rely on valves to control the airflow during patient inhale and exhale. Solenoid valves are great. They deliver fast response, but they're very costly and also require a higher pressure source to deliver high flow. And our early simulation work, which I'll show you in a few slides, shows that without a fast high flow valve, the design will require much higher peak power capability to reach the performance targets. So the team actually developed what they call this pinch valve. It's an electrically actuated lever that basically contracts the tube to restrict the flow. And this was a key innovation to be able to provide high flow and fast response without needing to throttle the blower. We'll show you some systems with and without it, and you can see the difference that it makes. And with this fast response, it really enabled the use of this automotive CPAP blower and with a pretty large reduction in peak power requirements because it eliminated the need to accelerate and decelerate the blower, as I'll show you shortly. And here's how the model of the pinch valve works. It's basically a table-based model again, where we have flow as a function of the pressure difference across it and the opening command. And some data was collected by the team to help characterize their valves and was turned into a table that looks like this. They didn't collect this much data, but this is how the table actually looked when we implemented it on the modeling side. In addition to controlling airflow, ventilators can deliver mixtures of air and oxygen. So you also need to be able to control oxygen to allow a variable ratio of what's called the FiO2. Here, they used an off-the-shelf proportional oxygen solenoid valve, and it was just modeled as a table-based resistance based on the data that you see here. And here's how it was turned into the data for the model. You can see there's clearly hysteresis from opening and closing. We did not model that, and you'll actually see later on that there's some evidence of some results deviation because we did not include the hysteresis, which is clearly there in the raw data. The next important part of the model is the patient model. It's really critical if you're going to try to do model-based ventilator design. This patient model simulates the breathing mechanics of the patient, and it can be very complicated because depending on the level of detail, you can have various resistances and capacitances in the airway, in the throat, and the lung. It can also include mechanics for an active patient. That means a patient that can initiate and breathe either partially or completely. So full-featured ventilators not only need to work for patients that are passive, in other words, they're not breathing at all, but they also need to work appropriately with active patients who can partially breathe, in which case you need to trigger the exhale event based on what you see from the patient side. So the patient model is extremely important because of all the different modes that the ventilator needs to operate in. And obviously we want to be able to run the model in those same modes. We use a very simple equation-based model for the patient. We actually implemented several different patient models, but this was the one that we went with because it was very easy and it actually had parameterization that matched up with the test matrix that was required for a challenge that this team participated in. It includes the overall resistance and capacitance for the patient and also a musculatory pressure to account for an active patient. So now that we've talked a little bit about some of the components, this is the system model architecture that we put together. It's got three big subsystems: the controller, the ventilator, and the patient. These are all replaceable subsystems connected up with a control bus. It allows us to kind of plug and play different implementations of these three subsystems as the design went forward. So now we'll talk a little bit about some of the models that we built and go through some of the stages of the development. The first model is what was called initial prototype. This was actually the prototype that was being built when Modelon actually engaged with the RespiraWorks team. You can see the model here, the schematic of the system, and also the model as it looks in the modeling tool. This system was really, really simple. It had oxygen actually introduced upstream of the blower, so the oxygen and the air mix, and there was no active valve control. So the idea is it possible to use the blower speed completely to meet the patient pressure requirement? And this was really a feasibility prototype to see if blower speed only control, which would be very nice and very simple, would be capable of meeting the requirements. And this is the way the model looks in Impact. Here you can see the model. Impact is our modeling platform. It's browser based, so you've got kind of the normal modeling capability and also the ability to kind of annotate your model with graphs and information. So this is how we were running the model, and we had all kinds of results here, but I will show you some extracted results in more detail. So this initial prototype was run with very low breathing rates and very low pressure targets. So you can see here in the graph, this is the pressures, the target pressure, and also the pressure that we achieved at the entrance of the patient, and also the lung pressure. Here you can see the various flow rates. The blower flow is in blue, the patient flow is in red, the exhaust flow is in green. We'll keep the same color scheme throughout the entire presentation, so help orient you. And at the bottom, you can see the blower speed. So it goes up during the intake event and then has all kinds of interesting response and drops during the exhale event. So some key findings from this initial prototype: the blower operates over a very wide range. And blower transients were a real concern. This was a very low rate event, and it was very difficult to meet the targets. It was very clear that with this blower operating in this way, you would not be able to meet your higher breathing rates and pressure targets. In addition, there's enormous oxygen waste and blower energy consumption without control valves. You blow a ton of stuff straight from the blower out the exhaust that doesn't go into the patient. You can tune that with the exhaust resistance to reduce that waste, but then you make the patient exhale more difficult. And a fixed resistance would not satisfy the requirements over a full range of operating conditions. So this was a very interesting result. It led to the next design iteration and actually led directly to the development of the pinch valve. When we showed some of these results, and we also showed what happens as we ran at other conditions, the team was actually a little bit shocked that it was as bad as it was, and quickly started the development of the pinch valve. So the next concept that was evaluated was called the mixing concept. So here you can see the schematic. In this concept, you introduced oxygen downstream of the blower. The blower is actually not rated for oxygen to go through it, only air. So we can't make fire. So oxygen comes downstream of the blower. There's actually a solenoid now on the exhaust leg, so we can control. It's an active valve here on the exhaust side. There's a couple of check valves in the system, and also more of the representative resistances with the Venturi sensor and also the filter. The control here was done with a custom block that can generate pressure commands based on the kind of inputs that the doctors would put into the device. There's all kinds of different targets: peak inspiratory pressure, the exhaust pressure, the breathing rate, the intake to exhaust ratio. And this block would basically generate all those kind of traces based on those parameters. And we control the exhaust solenoid, so we close it during the intake event and open it during the exhaust event. And here we were handling exhaust oxygen flow, but it was just a source that was introduced into the model. So what did we learn from this? So here is some simulation results. Again, pressure, flow rate, blower speed. Here is the whole list of conditions that were used for this simulation: respiratory rate, intake exhaust ratio, the patient pressure, peak inspiratory pressure, PIP, the exhale pressure, PEEP. So what did we learn from this? The solenoid eliminates the exhaust flow during the intake event and reduces oxygen waste. That was what was expected, and that's very effective. And because we're closing the exhaust valve, even though the blower is not very fast to respond, you can still meet, just barely, but you can meet your inspiratory pressure target at higher breathing rates, because we're able to close off the exhaust and you can build up that pressure. You also see there's a large flow when the solenoid opens, and that's because you've got basically two valves open at the same time, and so you do see some flow that comes out. But this is actually not a bad thing. This actually helps reduce pressures and facilitate the patient's breathing event. And there is some excess exhaust flow from the intake. We're not doing any valve control yet on the intake until the blower speed drops. So until the blower speed drops, you are putting additional blower flow and oxygen out of the exhaust until you can drop the blower speed. And you can see some interesting dynamics as the blower speed increases in the middle of the exhale event to keep what's called this PEEP ratio, which is the exhale pressure, so that you don't bring it all the way back down to atmospheric. So this was a much improved system design, and obviously it's more complicated, but the additions of the valves are really helping the system. The last concept that we modeled along with the team was what's called the Covent Con concept. This team was actually participating in the COVID-19 Ventilator Challenge. So this was the design intent for that system. So the system that they submitted as part of their application for this challenge. So this system includes those pinch valves, the intake and exhaust pinch valves are here. There's also the proportional valve for the oxygen. So now we're doing closed loop oxygen control. And the pinch valves are now on both legs. So here is the way the model looks to represent this system. And here's the way the actual system looks as it was built and tested. You can see all the various parts. This is what's called a quick lung. It's used to simulate the patient. And here you can see the display.
It's wrap up.
Yep, no problem. So we went through a calibration exercise with this model. It turns out that the system itself does some calibration that allowed some of our characterization to require a bit of calibration. But after calibration, we got actually really nice results. We were able to really replicate the system flow rates and the system pressures. So here there's 1, 2, 3 different tests where we're doing a pretty good job of matching the data. Overall, the results were reasonable. When we're running open loop control, you can't eliminate pressure overshoots if they occur, but the model looked very good and was deemed quite useful. So in conclusion, we developed a model of this RespiraWorks ventilator. We modeled various design iterations and supported both the design and the control for the team. The model was calibrated with information from the COVID-19 prototype. This team actually finished third in that challenge, which was a great showing. And future work is focused on applying the model for controller design and tuning. And if you're interested in learning more about the RespiraWorks team, they are still developing and building their ventilator. You can see some more recent iterations and also see some updates from that team. So thank you very much.